you to this really important and timely webinar, I think important, timely, and perhaps provocative webinar. Those of us who are in the policing, those of us in the policing sphere, and those of us from the public sphere understand the importance of policing. And I think oftentimes we are quite critical of how we are policed and the type of policing services that we actually receive. We also know, I'm sure by now, that in the early days of the national lockdown, the public, social media, the media have reported stories on and of how South African police services were not really treating citizens the way they thought they would be treated. So we expected safety and security, and in some instances, we did not get that. So against that background, the College of Humanities Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Untitled Chapter, had commissioned a group of academics as well as SAPS individuals to go ahead and have a webinar entitled Policing Through Violence in South Africa's Lockdown, Citizen Rights versus Police Responsibilities. The presenters that we originally had, and as you would see, notice that from your invites, were Major General Di Macazzo. Unfortunately, she's had a death. No, she's available. Oh, sorry, she's had a death in her family, and we just got news 2 minutes ago that she will be replaced by Director Mkadi from Visible Policing. And then we have Dr. Bronwyn Anderson, who will be looking at and speaking about policing and gender-based violence, the syndemic of lockdown during COVID-19. She will be followed by Professor Satna Manik, who's going to be looking at soft targets, police brutality. And then we have Major General Zulu. We're hoping that they are able to log into Zoom because they've been having some technical difficulties. But just before I ask Dr. Bronwyn to take the stage, I want to highlight the fact that since our lockdown, since the national lockdown, media reports have highlighted the public dissatisfaction with SAP's service provision. And at the same time, there were substantial complaints on SAP's use of violence during policing, during this period. Now, of course, some of us may know and understand that SAPS has the responsibility to ensure justice and accountability. However, the justification of the use of torture to save the life of the victim and lose the life of an offender does not credit the use of torture, and definitely renders it invalid and unacceptable. So with that quick background, I'm now handing you over to Dr. Bronwyn Anderson.
Thank you, Chair, and good day to all the panelists. Well, just one panelist for now, Prof. Manik, and thank you, Chair, Prof. And I think such a the signal got lost a bit. Am I back on? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Bronwyn.
Okay.
Proceed.
Thank you. Thank you. So as I was saying, it's really a pleasure to speak about this issue about gender-based violence, policing systems, particularly during the period of lockdown and COVID-19. As we know, this has become, and what I've titled my talk is Policing and GBV and a Syndemic of Lockdown during COVID-19. And you will come to understand why I say a syndemic. It's because of the multiple kinds of vulnerabilities that particularly women face during COVID-19. So I'll begin my presentation. I prepared a presentation, and I will begin by sharing the screen so that you will all be able to see. Okay, so policing through violence in South Africa's lockdown, citizens' rights versus police responsibilities. And before I go on to my presentation, I'd like to just say that I looked at the title and I saw policing through violence in South Africa's lockdown, citizens' rights versus police responsibilities. And that, for me, the title in itself spoke volumes, in that it's citizens' rights versus police responsibilities. And whereas it is exactly what we are facing, it's versus and not and, because these two should be synergized and not like the way it's put in opposition to each other. And that's exactly what we're experiencing. We're experiencing people's rights being abused. And sometimes, not all cases, and I don't mean to generalize, but there's lots of policing that goes on where brutality is the order of the day, which is acceptable because of the pandemic that we're facing. So that title speaks volumes for me, and I'm sure it speaks volumes for a lot of other people in terms of how does policing systems manage this pandemic that we are facing now and manage people and their rights. So we as South Africa generally have a fear of police. And I think I can speak for a lot of people as well, because I believe that I am a law-abiding citizen. However, if I am driving on the road and I get stopped by a policeman, immediately I have fear and panic. It's almost like, what did I do? And yet I know I'm law-abiding, but the fear. So what is it about policing that instills fear in us, rather than to say, these people have taken an oath to serve and protect, not to abuse, not to use corruption, and not to use brutality. So how do South Africans generally view and react to police? And I'm sure some people can identify with what I'm saying here. Our National Police Commissioner, Becky Taylor, acknowledged that the police's crime fighting and prevention strategies need a boost, and definitely need a boost is, I think it's, for want of a better word, it needs much more than a boost. And he urged communities to work with the police to make South Africans feel safer. And I think it works the other way around as well. Not only should communities work with the police, but the police should be working with communities. And the sad thing here is that there are no, we are supposed to have police with us on this forum, answering particular questions and helping us to understand what the limitations and the constraints are, that they do not do what they're supposed to do. And we're not shooting the messenger yet, but how do they actually get trained in ways that ensure that during disaster times such as what we are facing, that they're able to cope in these situations. And for me, it's more about the police working with communities rather than simply communities and policing systems actually in conjunction they should be working. So we have a constitution, the South African Constitution, but I believe that in the Bill of Rights, people's rights are protected, should be protected. However, we know that there's a disjuncture between the Bill of Rights, Chapter 2 of our Constitution, and how these rights are actually implemented. Do people actually have access to their rights? Do people know their rights? And this brings to mind another issue. Which groups don't know their rights? And it's the most vulnerable groups: women, children, communities of LGBTQIA+, Black people in particular, working class, refugees, immigrants. These are the most vulnerable groups who need the most support, who need the most protection. And I will speak about women in particular, and mostly about femicide and how that actually impacts on how policing is actually effective or not effective. So South Africa has been dubbed the rape capital of the world. However, this is not confirmed. It's been confirmed and it's been refuted at the same time. But the concern is that we are still regarded as one of 10 of the highest in the world, and that is alarming. Those statistics are alarming. We look at research and we look at what the statistics are, and the statistics change from time to time. We don't know the real statistics, and this points to something. It points to perhaps underreporting, non-reporting, and why is the big question, is this happening? And the rate of femicide is a national crisis in our country, and we know that. We see it, we see women being murdered, and we are asking the big question, what is the rate of prosecution? How many perpetrators are actually brought to book? So what is the effects of COVID-19 and the lockdown, right? So when we started at level 5 of police lockdown, there was high rates of police brutality, simply because I believe, and some data will show that, or findings of research will show that police are not really trained adequately to deal with these kinds of disasters. We are fortunate in South Africa that we don't even experience earthquakes and major kinds of disasters like volcanoes and tsunamis. So actually we are blessed in a certain way, for want of a better word. So we've experienced high rates of police brutality, but what has been neglected is the high rates of intimate partner violence, gender-based violence, and domestic abuse. And how does this happen in the time of this pandemic? How does this happen? Who's protected, who's not protected, and why has the high rates of gender-based violence soared and escalated during this time? And this points to a high rate of structural inequalities. So let's ask the question in terms of policing and the SINDF and their visibility. Which areas are they mainly sent to and located in is the big question. It's largely the areas where there's overcrowding, in the informal settlement areas. And this is problematic in itself, because how do you expect social distancing to happen? How can people isolate when they're crowded? And how does this impact on people, their lives? Women in particular, and this is where I come in with the gender-based violence issue. What our police commissioner has said is that when families feel safe in their homes, it builds and enhances confidence in the police and the justice system. I think not. This is absolutely an atrocity for him to say that, because many people during this COVID-19, during the lockdown period, particularly level 5, women were not safe in their homes. Women were particularly vulnerable, and I'm not neglecting or I'm not omitting anybody else, but I'm speaking about gender-based violence, including LGBTI children and so on. So how can a minister say something like, when families feel safe in their homes, it builds and enhances confidence in the police and justice system? This is an absolute, it's a travesty in terms of justice and what happens in people's homes during this time. So what happens during COVID-19 and GBV? Firstly, women are not allowed to leave their homes at level 5. They weren't allowed to leave their homes, and level 3 also, because lots of women are caregivers, and the structural inequalities, actually there are levels of inequalities in that women are largely responsible for taking care of their kids, for domestic responsibilities. So they're at home and helping the children who are not allowed to go to school to help them. So that's one thing. The other thing is this restricts their ability to report any forms of gender-based violence. So how do they leave their homes? If they are being abused in their homes, how do they leave their homes during level 5 lockdown and even level 3? So this has a ripple effect for women and children. Women fear that if they leave their homes, they might come home having been infected by COVID-19 and pass it on to their children as well. They are living with abusers. They are stuck in a home where the abuser is and cannot leave home to report. So we will ask the question, why am I calling this a syndemic, a term coined already by one of the a scholar? Because women are subjected to issues of poverty, vulnerability during COVID-19 and the COVID-19 pandemic. So they have a triple bind. They are actually in 3 ways or more affected because of these 3 issues that come together, intersect, and ensure that these women are in fact not being helped and not being seen to. So they've experienced multiple kinds of vulnerabilities. So what are the changes and what are the continuities? And it's important for policing system, police to be here, to be able to answer these questions. And unfortunately, they're not here, because we'll ask the question of forensics. When women report these kinds of gender-based violence, sexual violence, rape, harassment, what forensics are available? What is taken from them? How are they actually treated in terms of taking evidence to ensure that these particular cases go to trial? Secondly, non-reporting and underreporting. Why does this happen? This happens largely because of the insensitivity of policing, of policemen. If you go to a police station, for example, and I've experienced that, not myself, but I've seen it. A woman is supposed to report an act of violence by her husband, her partner, or anybody else in the midst of other people, in full view of other people. How is that allowed to happen? Why is the woman not taken to a private space where she can report this kind of violence? So there's this extreme lack of sensitivity around reporting systems. And we want to ask the big question, why is there underreporting? Why is there not reporting or non-reporting? Therefore, I believe that the statistics that are provided are actually skewed. They are not providing the accurate numbers of women that are being abused, subjected to IPV and gender-based violence and domestic violence as well. So the other issue is there a sexual offenders register? Because these sexual offenders might be incarcerated, but the big question again is, when they come out, or if they are actually prosecuted and charged, they come out and they are released back into society, and they often become repeat offenders. And this is a really, really huge problem. So the policing systems, the people that are here today, are not the kinds of people that can answer these questions. And the policing people, the systems, the police are the ones that we need to be asking these questions to, and we need answers to. So I can give quite a few answers to these, but it's not my place. But I can offer suggestions, because I know exactly what the kinds of changes and continuities are happening in this South African context in terms of our policing systems and our citizens' rights. So in closing, what I'd like to say is that definitely policing systems are failing our women, our children, our LGBTI and vulnerable citizenry in South Africa, and lots needs to be done in terms of making South Africa a better place, and allowing and getting, in fact, coercing and getting policing to a better place, and to ensure that they take responsibility for the oath that they have taken to serve and to protect, and not to enforce brutality on our South African community. And I will end there. Thank you so much for listening.
Dr. Bronwyn-Anderson, I think that was a lot of food for thought, lots of questions, and as you say, unfortunately, as of now, the police services have still not arrived. And I think these are the kinds of questions that you and other participants or attendees would like to have responses from the police. What came through for me very clearly is your passion regarding gender-based violence, especially, and violence in general in the country. And I think we all understand, and you have brought that out through your presentation, that we need the South African police services, because without them, citizens don't have, no legislation that would allow citizens themselves to become who could become kangaroo courts. And of course, violence will then lead to more violence. So thank you very much for that. At this point, we'd like, because of the fact that SAPS has not yet arrived, we decided as a team that we would now allow for questions and answers. So Dr. Bronwyn-Anderson will take some questions, but because we also send a notice out in advance, and some of our academics have sent us questions, unfortunately, I think the questions that I've received thus far were for SAPS, but I'm going to read it out nevertheless. Professor Mazibuko, who's really an experienced administrator and academic, is always very generous with her questions. And one good question that she asked is, does SAPS stations across have joint facilities with the Department of Social Development to help, for instance, where victims, particularly women and children, can go to for safety and protection? And I think that's something that Bronwyn raised, especially in terms of reporting violence, intimate partner violence or domestic violence, and the fact that it's such an open and public space. Although I know there are those Tutuka centers where the reporting should be done in private, but unfortunately many police officers don't actually practice that. So that's one of Prof. Mazibuko's questions. What we will be doing when we're done with the webinar is sending these questions to the department, to the National Policing Services, and ask them to give us some responses, which hopefully we will then share with the rest of the participants. Another question that came from Mika, and I think a very important one. She sent us 3 questions, but the one I'm going to focus on is, why does SAPS not have a DNA profile database of every South African, which will help in finding perpetrators of crime? And I'm not sure whether Bronwyn or Sadhna will be able to answer that in great detail, but we do know that South Africa, unfortunately, is lagging behind in terms of the DNA databases. We have just 3 forensic labs in the country, and I think we continuously hear of how the forensic labs don't have capacity or have some problem or the other that doesn't allow them to process as quickly as possible. So I think the capacity to have DNA profiles of every South African is a challenge, and perhaps is something that's long-term. We may propose that to the National Commissioning Policing sector as well. I see there's another one that has come through from Sipalelo, and she says, or he says, for example, if a complainant reports the case, the accused still regarded as innocent up until proven guilty. Police can arrest the accused and the court can release him or her. Yes, you are innocent until proven guilty, that's correct. But of course, depending on the nature of the crime, you would have a first appearance in court, and that's where bail is decided. The court will then decide whether the perpetrator should be granted bail or not. And then, of course, the natural process will continue. I want to allow Bronwyn a chance to respond to any of the questions.
Okay, thank you for that question. I think my response would be kind of limited because I cannot speak on behalf of the policing systems, and that's why I say it is really unfortunate that they are not here to be able to answer these kinds of questions. And there's quite, 15 minutes to be able to speak about this issue is very, very, the time is really limited, because I could speak for another hour, 2 hours or so. So if I want to answer the question on DNA and those kinds of systems that are not in place, yes, we are lagging behind, as Prof has alluded to. However, I did mention something about forensics in my presentation. And of course, that does include those kinds of DNA, the kinds of fingerprinting, the kinds of evidence that you would accumulate for repeat offenders, perhaps. And this is not happening in our policing systems. And I have been intricately involved in situations where women have reported being raped, being sexually abused, and it's been intimate partner violence by their husbands. And unfortunately, the police have not taken this matter seriously. They feel that you cannot be, and it really comes down to an issue of how our patriarchal system in society operates, which actually advantages and privileges men. And so men, and that sense of entitlement to women's bodies, and if you are my wife, you are not allowed to say no. So therefore, when women report these things, these kinds of abuses, no evidence is taken from them simply because it is your wife or it is your partner, which is very unfair, which is an injustice, a gross injustice actually. So in terms of forensics, we are lagging behind. We do not have a clue. I think we are absolutely clueless in that department. So basically what I'm saying is the issue of underreporting is actually connected to all these kinds of issues of lack of forensics, lack of sensitivity, and also the woman has to go back and live with her abuser. And it has dire consequences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anderson. I think very aptly said. Of course, I think, and that's why we are advocating for police officers to become more empathetic and realize that even if it's a domestic abuse situation, that we should no longer regard that as a domestic issue. It's an issue of violence, whether it's verbal, emotional, physical, it's an issue of violence. Professor Mazibuko has asked another question, I know is very important, and that is, not a question, she makes a comment, which is an excellent one, and she says she thinks the School of Applied Human Sciences should collaborate with NGOs and SAPs to generate community awareness programs, and she links this to Chapter 12 of the NDP 2030, and I think Sadhna's going to say Sadhna in her talk is going to alert us to Chapter 12 of 2030, which it deals specifically with safety and security in South Africa. But it's 2020 already, and I'm not sure in 10 years' time whether we'll be able to achieve our goals for NDP 2030. At this point, I also want to alert our audience and participants to the fact that corporate relations has been for the past 30 minutes trying to connect with SAPs. They are struggling on their side, as I mentioned earlier, probably technology issues. But as soon as they join us, and it will be a real bonus for us as participants because we have lots of questions for them. With that, I'm going to introduce you to Professor Sadhna Manik, a seasoned academic like Dr. Bronwyn Anderson, and very much rights-based. And you would have heard from Dr. Anderson's presentation as well, her emphasis on rights of people. Professor Manik is also rights-based, and I think especially coming from a country like South Africa, moving from pre-democracy to post-democracy, and we understand that the cornerstone of our democracy is based on rights. I would now like to hand you over to Professor Manik.
Thank you, Nirmala. I want to just say that I'm so extremely disappointed that we have no representatives from law enforcement. That shows the extent to which we are indeed lagging behind, because if they did pitch to today's webinar, it would have easily pointed that they have some sense of police accountability to the public. And the mere fact that they've chosen at this late stage not to pitch also shows that they don't even have a sense of responsibility towards this webinar and to unpacking some critical issues. That being said, I also want to emphasize at the outset that I do think it's extremely unfair to also label the entire police force as constituting of violent individuals. We do know that there are some sterling examples of dedicated police officers whom the public can be proud of to have in their midst, and these we salute. But this webinar is not about them. This webinar is about policing through violence in South Africa's lockdown. Citizens' rights versus police responsibilities. And I'm going to then briefly just rupture this title somewhat. So please forgive me for doing that. Policing through violence. So I'm asking, is this a euphemism for police brutality? Because that's exactly what we're saying. But let's unpack police brutality and have a working definition for ourselves at this webinar. So I'm going to draw from a candidate attorney, Kabela Kumana, who explains that police brutality is defined as the unlawful abuse of the capacity to use force by a police or peace officer. It includes unlawful detention, unlawful arrest, malicious prosecution, and physical assault by enforcement officers on citizens. Please note, on citizens, there's no mention made here of immigrants, whilst they are conducting their functions as enforcement officers. I'm going to return to that idea of citizens and immigrants a little later. So this idea of policing through violence, or the concept of police brutality, is actually not a feature of lockdown in South Africa per se. It is actually something which has been going on in South Africa for a long time. And let me cite some statistics here to bolster this argument. IPID, the police watchdog, reveals that more than 42,000 complaints have been made about the police between 2012 and 2019. These include rape, killings, torture. That's an average of 5,250 complaints annually. And exactly as Bronwyn mentioned, we know that these are extremely conservative figures because victims have a tendency not to report a crime, especially one that's perpetrated by the police. So what is the role of the police during the pandemic? We know that the pandemic has led to the president declaring that South Africa is in a state of disaster, and as such, the police, who are designated law enforcement officers during a state of disaster, are actually supposed to be peace officers. So SAPs can investigate and prosecute a criminal for a criminal offense. Whilst undertaking these duties, they are obliged to use the least possible force where necessary. But what do we have? Social media is replete with cases of civilians being assaulted by the police for non-compliance with lockdown measures. But let's look at this regulation itself. Regulation 11G of the regulations issued in terms of Section 27.2 of the National Disaster Management Act 67 of 2002 states that any person who contravenes these regulations will be liable to a fine or imprisonment not exceeding 6 months. The regulation does not call for the use of force on the public for non-compliance with lockdown regulations at all. But what we do see is that the lockdown has created further opportunities for police violence to manifest itself in communities. So the pandemic did not precipitate violence by the police. It created an additional space for the police to flex their muscles, targeting what many researchers are pointing to as soft targets, namely poor Black South Africans and immigrants. And now again, I will say I will return to immigrants in a moment. So what do we see in terms of citizens at the moment? So in June, the South African Human Rights Commission claimed to be actually following IPID's investigation of 10 known deaths as a result of police brutality since the commencement of lockdown in South Africa. So what appears to be rearing its ugly head is the claim that this pandemic is showcasing race and class inequalities in South Africa. Chris Nissen, who's the commissioner, states that COVID-19 has opened up this brutal inequality in South Africa, the great divide between races and classes, and he's hoping that change will come. Of course, if our major generals pitched at today's webinar, we would have actually spent some time trying to work towards transforming and speaking about the changes that we need to see happen. Harrisburg also writes about police brutality against poor Black citizens. We all know about the death of Collins Khosa on April 10th in Alexandra Township, a man who was in his own property with his partner and another family member. All three victims of police brutality, and Khosa lost his life for a cup on his property, which allegedly had alcohol when there was a ban on the sale of alcohol. We saw something similar in terms of police brutality abroad with the death of George Floyd in the USA, which led to the Black Lives Matter protest that had a ripple effect here for us in South Africa. Why? It resonates with the experiences of poor Black South Africans at the hands of law enforcement officers in our midst. Let's now turn to immigrants. We know the coronavirus does not distinguish according to passport and citizenship, as Zanka and Moya articulate. But we do know that the police have been known to target immigrants in their raids. Immigrants are constantly constructed as criminals even when they are law-abiding. We know there's this grand narrative of Black immigrants in South Africa as being criminals. I'm again going to unpack the title a little and rupture it. I think that maybe we went amiss in the title of this webinar, because it in itself, it's discriminatory, because it focuses on citizens' rights. So let's extend it. We're going to extend it to the public in South Africa, because everyone is part and parcel of lockdown if you are living in South Africa. You've not, as an immigrant, been subjected to different rules and regulations based on your citizenship. Although we know that the police and some ministers have been engulfed in controversy around citizenship, we know that what we've seen 2 days before lockdown with Minister Ntshavheni stating that lockdown and the opening of spaza shops owned by immigrants will not be allowed. And that was then overturned sometime after. But it shows the extent to which xenophobia actually pervades not just the police, but across our communities. Pre-COVID-19 was replete with anti-immigrant discourses, and that served as an indicator of South Africa actually being a violent country for immigrants. That's what Tati says. And again, I'm going to draw on the statistics related to xenophobic violence since 2008, which serves as an indicator of this. We also know that the police have been targeting immigrants. In 2012, the provincial Limpopo police commenced Operation Heartstick. That was supposed to have been a crime-fighting initiative. What did it do? It targeted small immigrant-owned businesses and not South African citizens. Crush, Chikanda, and Skinner undertook a study where they detail that over 600 business operators had their goods confiscated, and they were informed that foreigners cannot have businesses in South Africa. This led to a Supreme Court declaration wherein it was stated that one is left with the uneasy feeling that the stance adopted here was to induce foreign nationals to leave South African shores. Crush has stated that this is an endemic problem in South Africa. He stated that it's not peculiar to one province. There is the smorgasbord of regulatory, legal obstacles, this culture of police and official impunity, which confronts small immigrant businesses. A year later, in 2013, we met with Operation Clean Sweep in Johannesburg, 2013, that is. Again, targeting 6,000 immigrant shop owners. And once again, the Constitutional Court ruled in their favor. Crush here stated that in South Africa, immigrants are denigrated to being seen as unwanted parasites. There's this aura of them being vermin. There's also sufficient evidence from other studies. For example, Chinese entrepreneurs exposing corrupt police who were extorting money from them. Zimbabweans revealing bribing of border officials so that they can send remittances across the border. Collectively, for example, immigrant shop owners in South Africa have been experiencing the looting of their shops, physical violence, intimidation, extortion, etc. And all of this has happened pre-COVID-19, and it has continued during the pandemic. 2 weeks, in fact, before the lockdown, Mutandiro reported on immigrant spaza shop owners in Deep Sloot, Johannesburg, complaining of police brutality, harassment, the extortion of money, goods being confiscated. And all of this in what Minister Beki Cele is referring to as crime stabilization. Clearly, there's an aura of police corruption and brutality that is going across this time. Of course, immigrant businessmen themselves have expressed fear and a reluctance to report these crimes, although they have revealed photographs and video footage. Why? They're afraid of being victimized. Ultimately, the police have this responsibility to ensure the safety and security of the public. But currently, the public does not feel safe and secure during the pandemic or even prior to COVID-19. So this webinar was critical. It was critical to have the police amongst us, participating in this for the social and economic protection of citizens and immigrants, and to ensure that human rights abuses do not become the order of the day in South Africa. Accountability by the police is important for South Africa. It is one of the pillars by which society judges the police. The public loses faith in the police who display what can only be viewed as deviant behavior because it does not encapsulate the core values that the police force should have: respect, excellence, etc. So I wanted to, at this point in time, actually invite the police, the law enforcement officials that we had in our midst, to take this as an opportunity to be self-critical. But clearly they are not here. So it's going to be lost to them. But I'm going to ask Nirmala to pass this on to them. This is COVID-19 is a watershed moment for them, like with many other countries, to assess the weaknesses in law enforcement before COVID-19 and during this pandemic, and to use this to try to transform policing in South Africa. The other aspect that I wanted to also invite them to do is not to underestimate the power of collaborative efforts to strengthen law enforcement in South Africa and to move away from policing through violence. The importance of harnessing university structures, as Professor Mazibuko has pointed to, NGOs, schools, all of these in creating and promoting the good efforts of police. We all know how the Hawks were loved, but that's not this present time. And it's most important to have mechanisms that we start to put in place, positive mechanisms for law enforcement. And in fact, I actually detest that word enforcement, because the root word there is force, and that is something we want to move away from. So I'd like to end there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Manik. That was very powerful, very provocative, and I think also very timely, especially in an era where we've seen, or at a time when we've seen quite a bit of xenophobia and the role of the police in xenophobic attacks. So I think that was really, I'm sure that participants really enjoyed that. Thank you also for raising the fact that, using the word enforce, the way in which language influences behavior. And I think that was the very reason why we had, South Africa had changed from the police force to the police service. That the South African police was one of the major institutions that underwent major transformation post-1994. But unfortunately, the force that was used prior to 1994 continues to be used now, and that's why we have the kind of violence that we do. There are many questions that have arisen, Prof. Manik, from after your presentation. Many thank you messages for your presentation. Some have requested the presentations. There are also questions or comments around the fact that, SAPS, when women, especially when women report violence at the community service centers, reports are lost. Our attendees are talking about their own personal experiences in terms of how the lack of capacity in SAPS to take the reports seriously. Then we have other comments where where some of our attendees are talking about the various forms of secondary victimization, and what does SAPS actually do about secondary victimization. And I think those are really critical questions that attendees and participants are asking. And I'm sure that at the end we will be sending these questions and comments to SAPS themselves. I've just heard that the SAPS director is online. May I please have confirmation from Melissa?
She's online.
Okay, so
I've just
with that,
asked her to unmute, so let's see.
all right, so
Hello.
that is the director from this part.
Hello, good afternoon.
We are really happy to have you, Director.
Thank you.
So may we hand the floor over to you? If you could please introduce yourself, and then I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions for you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. In the new normal, we tend to struggle. There's still things we are all learning. I'm Bali Mngadi. I am the section head for vulnerable groups and victim empowerment, stationed at head office, national head office in Pretoria. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having us. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to catch a lot of what has been said, so I'm just sorry, you'll have to brief me a bit.
Oh, so Director, what you will do is tell us a little bit about how policing has taken place or occurred during COVID-19. Do you believe that police are unjustifiably violent, or is their violence justified? You would by now know that Trevor Manuel made quite a provocative remark about the South African National Defence Force and the police in terms of the way in which they've been policing a South African public. And I'm sure some politicians were not happy about that. So perhaps you could speak to us about a little bit about that. And then Minister Fikile Mbalula, who spoke about the fact that, the commissioner or the minister Becky Cele, who spoke about the role of alcohol in crime. So it would be really interesting for you to give us a high level view of how policing during COVID-19 is actually happening.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not sure about the aspect on the police themselves, the secondary victimization issues. What I can say in that regard is, if anybody is being maltreated, they would need to, report it to the station management. What I was going to tell you about in policing during the COVID is with regard to what we have done in terms of providing guidelines for the policing of gender-based violence as a way of saying to our members, please do remember the ethical issues on the handling of victims, on the handling of offenders. You treat victims with dignity and respect. Remind them also of the need to ensure that as they police, they do not allow for, the transmission of the COVID virus, whether, between the police, with the victims, and with the offenders. So in that regard, this was what I would be able to talk to. And then to say also that should there be
Okay, I've noticed that we're having some problems with.
Sorry about that.
Problem. Thank you for returning.
Sorry about that call. But what I was going to talk to, hello. is that there's a service delivery line. I've actually even got the provincial service delivery lines. And our service delivery line, the national one, is the 080-333-3177. And of course, there was the concern that during COVID, with the offender and victim, as it were, sharing the same space, there would be the challenges of the offender who may be controlling the victim in one way or another and preventing them from making their call. So it was also an issue of saying, try and ensure, if you can, that you are able to communicate to at least the neighbors. You are able to also, use various options for reporting, because it may be a problem also to move from the residence, the place of residence, to the police station. Then you could try, if you have these smartphones, you could try downloading your MySEPS app. You could try Crime Line 32111, or the other reporting line would be 08-600-1011. And of course, in the emergency, as you would be aware, it would be the 10111 number. So for us, this was what, we were more concerned with: accessing the service, reporting, and also saying when members are not doing the right thing, being able to bring it to the attention of station management, so station management is able to, address the matter and manage the member who is doing something which is actually not in compliance with SAPS instructions. Because we had clear policies, some of it, coming from 1999. And in our guidelines, we were just reminding members, remember your ethical conduct and try and adhere to it. And yes, that was what I was going to indicate. Hello?
Yes, Director, you're still on and we can hear you. Are you there? Director, can you hear us? All right. In the meantime,
Hello?
yes, you're back on. You need to unmute. Okay, in the meantime, while we're waiting, there's Director's back on.
Yeah, I didn't realize somehow I went off at some stage.
All right, you're back on.
I'm back on. Oh dear.
Yes.
And I have been speaking so much. So please, if you could indicate
Most of you. We've heard
what
most of
you,
you.
oh, okay. Including, the issues of ethical conduct, which is in terms of our national instructions. And if somebody is not complying to that, then we would need to have management informed or utilize the complaints service delivery line.
All right. So is it fine that you stop there and we take some questions?
Oh, please, yes.
All right. So Director, thank you very much for being able to join us eventually. I'm reiterating that because we had some of our participants, and I think rightfully so, were not happy that SAPS had not pitched. So thank you for that. One of the questions that emerged during the earlier presentations was the fact that IPID, does not necessarily, well, I don't know if it's punish or convict police who are guilty of violence or brutality. Are you able to comment on that for us, please? Director, are you there?
Oh, unmute, sorry. Yes.
Okay, yes, okay, thank you.
I'm not sure whether I would be able to comment on how IPID functions, but I think the key thing for us is to enable the management to address the issues, to indicate which member it is who has not done what they are hired to do and what they swore in a code of conduct that they would adhere to. So for us, it would be disciplinary process would have to be meted out by the station management. But for that to happen, station management would then need to be informed about any misconduct that a member has been engaged in. I don't know whether
Right.
that answers.
Yes, yes, that does answer it. So I have another question for you. And I think this is something that you probably are aware of, and it is about the culture of solidarity among SAPs. It's very difficult for one member in SAPs to telltale on another, regardless of how heinous the crime or the transgression is. So would you, I'd like you to comment on whether that perception is correct, that SAPS officers will go to any length to protect their fellow officers.
A perception, and we're also indicating that it is a perception. I mean, look at the number of members we have on a daily basis. You will have on our communication nodal, communications point, you know, our press releases that we send out to the press, where you have had members who have committed any crimes, and it is our members, by the way, who arrest them and not an outsider from somewhere else. So, you know, it's a pity that there is that perception out there, and which is why then it's also important that people get this complaints service line. There also are, by the way, the provincial service lines, which I can also make available to yourselves, that then people can call if then it is if they do not have confidence in the local station management. But I would strongly urge that people actually start with the station management, because we have had people who actually get disciplined. We have had people who get arrested if they have committed a crimes and who are police officers, and there is no protection, you know, of police officers automatically because they're being handled by other police officers. It's something I'd really like to plead with everybody out there that they please exercise and do.
All right, thank you very much, Director. Professor Manik wants to ask a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Nirmala. A quick one, Director. I would like you to respond to the contention and the evidence that's coming up from several studies and from grassroots level that the police is actually flexing their muscles and targeting what's called soft targets in society, namely poor Black South Africans and immigrants. And here I want to draw on the case of, for example, Collins Koza, who was killed who died at the hands of police as a result of brutality, and 10 other cases that IPID is currently investigating. And this is not anyone's perception, because there is enough video footage, etc., that backs up this. Could you please comment on that?
The Collins Koza case is actually one of the things that brought to the attention of the National Commissioner and the national management some of the gross violations that may be conducted out there. And I must say it is taken extremely seriously. And I think the National Commissioner then ensured that the proper steps were made, to address these issues. And, it has been a name that's familiar with us in the sense that it is used as the name of what to avoid and the sort of things that bring a lot of shame and disgrace upon a really noble profession, or what we try and strive towards as being a professional, ethical conduct, protecting members of the public and not violating members of the public. That is the approach that we really like to encourage amongst our members.
Can I just come in?
Brahman, are you?
Can I just come in there?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. I know you've missed our presentations and what we were speaking about. My talk was generally on gender-based violence and how women have been extremely vulnerable. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly exposed the lagging behind, the lack of during this pandemic. It has exposed our inefficiency, the ineffectiveness of policing systems, etc. Now, you spoke about, and I've spoken about a number of things in terms of reporting, and you spoke about women having phones and getting in contact with call centers and things like that. I think it's always easier said than done. You speak about call centers, women who are living in homes during a lockdown, which doesn't allow them any voice. It doesn't allow them any power. There are gender power relations which you're not taking into account. And I think the elephant in the room here is being totally neglected. And the elephant in the room is that these women are vulnerable. That if they make a phone call and they report a case of abuse, they are living with the abuser. So how does that work in terms of getting assistance? Secondly, they cannot leave their homes, as I said, because they are not allowed to leave during lockdown. How do they report? And then we have the issues of secondary victimization, and we have all these other things that are occurring. And you speak about call centers, about going to the director at the police station. This is all, excuse my term, it's hogwash. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because police are, and I'm not generalizing, but they are protected. Some policemen do protect each other. I've seen it, I know it. And so, how do you get past the system if you are not allowed to speak to the directors, not available? How do you to get past the system. What happens to interdicts, protection orders, where women, despite having interdicts and protection orders, are murdered? Femicide is on the rise. It is escalating at levels that are alarming. So how do we work around that system? If you can respond to that, please.
Yeah.
All right.
Director?
Thank you. You know, in a perfect world, I think when I started, I did indicate that this is quite a challenge. Why? Because we have an offender who is locked down or living with the victim. And that is really quite a challenge. But then the issue is, how do the police get to know about what is happening at 540 Pretoria Street? You see, this is part of what the challenge is. And
I do hear you, Director, but how did the police get to know what's happening at Collins Cause's home, for example, that he has something in his cup? How did the police get to know that in the confines of his home? These are the big questions that we need answered. That's why I'm saying this is an elephant in the room. It's huge. Gender-based violence, the levels, our own commissioner said there are 2,390 some odd reports of gender-based violence and 169, I think, charged. Now, how do you reconcile those two figures in terms of gender-based violence, where women, the vulnerable groups, are being totally neglected? There's no policing, there's no protection, there's no monitoring. So where are their rights? Their rights are totally violated. And this is what I'm speaking to. How does citizens' rights and policing systems, how do they come together? The synergy between the two. Because like we see it, definitely it is citizens' rights versus policing systems. And I understand you might be the messenger, and we don't want to shoot the messenger, but we need answers, and we need things to happen.
Shooting the messenger. Could I, if I could, please be provided the opportunity to then answer and finish?
Sure. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I just would like to first maybe start by indicating, yes, we have our bad apples. We all have, I mean, I think in all places we have bad apples. However, I don't think that that should then make us reject everybody else and not appreciate the situations when people have been doing the right things. And people, by and large, really, our members, if you are going to report, they will try and provide you with the necessary assistance. If the bad apple is not doing what is required, please do report to station management. Actually, a number of stations you will see right on the wall already. There is the number of the station commander. You may even call them, or you just simply stand your ground and say, I need to speak to the relief commander, to whoever is in charge here today. And really, I'd like us to also bear in mind, I know with the people who haven't been doing what they're supposed to do, it becomes difficult to go past that. And remember that there are people like, let me just give the example of a Constable Ramalepe who died during COVID, lockdown, now in May, protecting a victim whilst the victim was being shot at by the husband. Now, the partner managed to grab the victim and go down with her and take cover. And Ramalepe, unfortunately, was shot in that incident, and he passed away. And I don't believe that Ramalepe is necessarily an exception to the rule. There are many more police officers out there, but unfortunately, what happens is, what gets out there is the people who are not doing what they are supposed to be doing. We do have our commitment, and we do try and protect the victim as much as possible. And it's such a shame that then we will judge the whole police service due to the people who are not doing what they are required to be doing.
I'm going to thank you very much for that response, Director. Professor Mannix wants to ask a question, but before she asks her question, I want to piggyback on your last response and find out, has the management of SAPS ever asked SAPS officers what their feelings are when they are regarded as bad apples, or the public perception of their service is poor, their image is poor? Has SAPS management ever conducted an exercise of that nature, or do you think it's necessary? It's over to you, Victor. You're muted.
Oh, hello? Here.
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry. Okay. We do participate in the victim surveys that have been conducted, and we do know public perceptions, and we found that public perceptions will vary depending on people's experiences. And there are those who may feel, okay, members are doing what they're supposed to be doing and are being let down by those who are not complying to what are actually the rules of ethical conduct that we have.
Have you ever spoken to police officers in terms of how they feel about the public perception?
Well, we do, but not in an official way. It's more like the debriefing sort of exercises that we would have. But our members, we know, again, depending on where you are, their perceptions will vary as well.
Thank you.
Depending on what their own experiences have been. And for some, it has been rewarding in that they can say, you know, we have moved past this situation. This offender was actually convicted for the offenses that they committed against their family, in terms of whatever harm they may have caused members of their family. At least we managed to win this one and see it done and the person convicted. And there's some level of satisfaction that people get, you know, some pride in seeing things coming out with a just outcome.
Wonderful. Thank you, Director. Sadhana?
Okay, I want to speak directly to the director in this question, because I want to explain to her that because she arrived late, she probably missed, like she said, at the beginning of my presentation, where I stated that it is unfair to label the police force, the entire police force, as constituting violent individuals. I did say that there were sterling examples of dedicated police officers that the public can be proud of, but I also said that this webinar is not about such police officers. This webinar is about those police officers who are not dedicated to their work in the sense that they have overstepped their boundaries. And I think anyone is in denial if they do not realize that the public has no faith currently in the police. It's as simple as that. The evidence is all out there. The research has been done by multiple researchers across at least a decade. And I think that this has to be tackled. And let me just take one example. Let's take one other vulnerable group. And I want to give the director some examples. Okay, let's take the immigrant spaza shop owners who don't feel safe during the pandemic, right? And let's take Suzani's study, okay, about protection now being offered to immigrant shop owners because there were attacks on them. And this is 100 immigrant shop owners in Nelson Mandela Bay receiving letters from an organization, okay, about donations, but the police have said, yes, it sounds like it could be extortion. But this is not an isolated incident. It's happening amongst Somali, Bangladeshi spaza shop owners. It's in Mthatha, it's in Komani. In fact, it is across the board. Then there's a study by Mutandiro, similarly on spaza shop owners in Diepsloot, complaining of police brutality, harassment, confiscating goods, extortion of money, and all of this during what the police minister referred to as crime stabilization. The aura of police corruption and brutality is something that we need to acknowledge at some point in time during this pandemic if we want to transform the sector. And I've stated when I finished off to say that talk, have the discussions. Don't underestimate the power of collaboration, whether it's with NGOs, whether it is with university researchers. Like Nirmala was saying, ask for assistance on how to strengthen policing so it's not policing through violence. And these things are important to build that profession that you were talking about. At the moment, if you ask, I promise if you ask anyone who's a child in school, what would you like to be when you grow up? No one is going to say, I want to be a policeman. Yet 30, 40 years ago, you asked children in school, they would say, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a policeman. No one wants to be a policeman. Why? Because the public opinion at the moment shows that they're held in very poor light. It's as simple as that.
All right, Sadhna, we're going to stop there for the moment and we'll allow the director to respond and then we will take some questions from the floor. Director?
What I would also like to
There we go,
hear
Director.
is more. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, great. Thank you. Chair, what I really would like to hear more of, really, because I think nobody is saying the bad apples are to be celebrated. Absolutely not. And we're not even attempting to say so. And in terms of working in collaboration, we have been working in collaboration and partnership with a whole range of institutions, NGOs. Actually, as we did this guideline, we put out our guidelines. We also put out a document, a resource document called the Pathway, which would be something that was developed by the then interim steering committee member organizations that come from a civil society or NGOs. And we even topped up, updated, you know, contact lists that we sent through to the provincial commissioners to say, here are services that you may want to refer your victims as you come across to, whether it's counseling services that can also top up a list of services, because it's a must that you have to have a list of services that are available within a precinct that you can always refer a victim to for further assistance, whether they need counseling or shelter, legal advice, or whatever it is that, you know, would empower them at least to move forward and move out of their situation. Now, what we are saying is we already are working with a whole range of people. We're not working in isolation. Right now, we're saying we'd like to know and understand more. Putting together, you know, why have we been seeing the trends that we have been seeing during the lockdown when it comes to the reporting of gender-based violence? That's what we've also wanted to know. Now, I don't know, for the mere fact that we got these reports, surely it must mean that there are people who have enough confidence in the police and to be able to do so. And really, I would really want to know, other than the disciplinary actions, because we don't leave a person undisciplined who should be disciplined. We even have for you an escalation number, the 080-333-3177 that I mentioned earlier on, that if you are not satisfied with what is happening in this station, you can always report to. Now, I'm open really to any proposals that you can make beyond getting the members who are not doing the right thing addressed. What else would we need to do? Really, I think we would benefit from any proposals, and then let's consider it. Please put it on the table.
Thanks, Director. I'm glad that you're very tough for the kind of questions that you're being asked. And I think we really appreciate that, the strength that you are actually displaying. One of the attendees asked a question, and that is, who should they contact? No, at the station level, are the station commanders' contact details readily available to the public? That's one of the questions. And of course, I think there's also some very interesting conversations. For example, what do we need to transform society in terms of policing as well to enable, actually, I think for me it is, what do we need to transform the way policing is done in South Africa so that we can have a safer society? I think it's also important that policing is seen as generational. We want to, during this generation, construct a very safe and secure space for our children and our grandchildren. But let's go to the first question about where the information, the station commander's information, where is that available? Director?
Oh, sorry. I really need to be having to. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great. One of the issues of readily available, what we try and encourage, and I've seen it at some police stations, I can't confirm whether it's happening at all, but what we like to encourage is that the station management's details should be on the wall. You know, in the what you used to call the charge office, which is the community service center. Now, the idea being what? The idea idea being, we then have station visible policing, meaning the boss of the people that you see in front of you in the wall. Now, I've seen in some stations you even have they'll have pictures of the station commanders, so that in case somebody is trying to pull a fast one on you, as they walk past, you say, that's the station commander, and you can actually go to them. But you can request also, the relief commander, could I please see whoever is the community service center commander, the commander of the people here, and detective commander, station commander. You can actually get it from the wall. All right. So that's one of the issues. The other one, what do we need to do to transform policing? Wow, that's quite a great question. I take it by transform bad issues rather than transforming good issues from policing. Is that what we're saying? Because what I also believe is that over time, we have been having information of policing into forms that are more people-friendly, that are more sensitive to victims. Hence, you'll also have your victim sensitization workshops. We also have as an element of social context in our training on domestic violence, victim empowerment, first responder to sexual offenses. A whole range of sensitization also goes into our training. But, you know, I don't know, guys, any other proposals that you may have, we would really welcome. But for us, we have been trying our supervision of members through monitoring, through members of the public to come forward when they see something that is not right being done, so that we can address it. If we don't know about it, if people assume that we are going to protect and therefore don't report, then there is no way we'll be able to address the matter. Please, let's try and do that, and always escalate. I've given the issues, sorry, in the event that it isn't being handled in the manner that it should. I don't know if I've answered all the issues that you required. Hello?
You're muted, Prof.
Sorry.
Sorry, I said you're doing very well, Director. I think everybody's enjoying your responses.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, so there's one question that was asked earlier in relationship to one of your comments, and that is, can the collaborations that you spoke about be in the form of concrete community-based programs so that the desired change can be achieved before the harm is done? Remember you spoke about NGOs, collaborations with NGOs.
Yes.
So is that happening prior to the harm, or is that happening as a knee-jerk reaction after the crime has been committed?
Sure, that's a loaded question. Okay, there are two things here. Remember, we have community police fora. And community police fora are basically your representatives from the community that is being policed, from the precinct, from those surroundings. It will be men, who actually, you know, the passion and will choose and prevent. We'll find projects. We believe, for instance, some of our key crime prevention programs that, you know, in the social crime prevention realm would be your schools-based programs, because there we believe you invest in the sort of attitudes of growing citizens, treating other people with respect, treating other people's property with respect, getting them to understand and appreciate at a very young age and build resilience against crime within young people. You know, youth-based programs tend to be, they have a huge potential for actually, you know, long-term crime prevention, giving positive values within young people, young men and young boys, learning to, in future, treat them like chattels and possessions and things that they can buy and beat up. You know, we really enjoy visiting the schools with your Adopt-a-Cop member, and also encouraging people after the crime. So we would have those collaborative activities, after school programs. We remember, for young people, again, we've got something called Junior Commissioner, which is based more or less on your girl guides, or Boy Scout kind of organizations, places where young people can recreate, have recreation after school, and at them go into thinking in a manner that really is not friendly towards crime. Yeah, it's those kind of collaborations we have, not to mention the services we refer people to in terms of your
We cannot hear you, Director.
Social services may be provided by certain NGOs who are accredited by the Department of Social Development. You don't hear me now. Hello, can you hear me? Hello,
Yes, we
me
can
now.
hear you now.
What's
Yes.
happened to this thing?
Yeah, not clear.
Hello?
Yes, Director, we can hear you now. And we can't now. All right, in the meantime, while we're waiting for the Director to find her voice, I know there have been many questions and comments coming through in the Zoom webinar chat. And I think they're all really interesting questions, especially I read someone say that they were expecting some knowledge sharing and not finger pointing. And the response to that was, this is knowledge sharing. So I think even the finger pointing can be constructed as knowledge, and how we use that information in terms of the way forward becomes very critical. Yes, and we will all have our own perceptions and our views on policing, on various departments in the country, and I think we're entitled to that. Unless we have those robust thoughts, unless we have those rigorous debates, we won't see much change in the country. I think one of the good initiatives right now is the issue on corruption during COVID-19. Of course, it has its pros and cons, and we're not here to discuss those pros and cons, but it's important to have webinars of this nature. While the director still tries to find herself, I want to say, and I don't think she is, because she seems to be off. Oh, yes, okay.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Director, I'm not sure if you heard what I have been saying, but I think that the kind of discussions we had and the questions that have come through were all very meaningful. Some of them may not have been as pleasant as we would have liked them, but you know, academia is very robust, and we would not expect anything less from academics but a robust debate. I think policing in South Africa is very critical. Without a safe society, you know, emotionally, psychologically, people don't feel safe, and that affects the economy, etc., etc. I'm hoping that you take some of the comments and the questions back to your own directorate, and you do a report back, and maybe find, it will find a space in some of your conversations, and look at what's coming from the ground, and how can that help to improve the kind of policing that we have currently in South Africa. Yes, and I know transforming the police is a huge task, and it does require the society as well. For example, I know many years ago we were talking about communities that harbor criminals. And when communities harbor criminals, it's very difficult then to reduce crime, especially when it's so-called hardened criminals or criminals who participate in trio crimes, etc. So with that, we have 14 minutes left. I'm going to give a chance to the last round of questions to the our two presenters, and then maybe take a last round of comments, questions from our audience, and then we will wrap up. Professor Manik.
Thank you, Professor Gopal. I'm going to just respond to the director and her question about some ideas on what can be done. Because for me, this was the most important aspect of this webinar, was for us to come together and to find a way of forging a better tomorrow in terms of society and in terms of policing, such that there is renewed faith in the police. So last week, I took a walk, actually. I went to the nearest police station. First, I tried calling the police station, and you can't get through to their normal line. So maybe a start would be that when people are in need, you are actually able to get through to your local police station. That's one. Two, when you enter a police station, the core values and ethical conduct of police is not on their walls. That is something that every station should have. The very same way that they have all the regulations, COVID-19, the social distancing, on all of those things, I think it's a reminder there for police that these are your core values that you should be holding dear when they see it. For me, the most important thing that we need to have, the two things actually that we need to have. One is that there needs to be an evaluation by every person that enters the police station about the way in which they were treated and attended to. The very same way that when you walk into a bank, they tell you within 30 seconds, within 2 minutes, within 5 minutes, you will be dealt with, okay? But here I'm talking about feedback should be given at the police station. about the way in which your particular concern was tackled by the police. And I think that is a way to actually gain good feedback from grassroots level. Another key aspect is that there's no video footage of what goes on in the police station. There's no video footage of vehicles that go out, where they go to, where they come back. So no one then knows whether indeed are engaging in forms of brutality. And these are things that you can take up, Director, and have that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Satna. Director, I think those were suggestions for you. I would like to know from Bronwyn, I remember you. I want to know whether our participants have any questions for the other two panelists, for Professor Manik and Dr. Anderson. If you have, I don't mind you raising your hand if you could do that, or you could write your comment or question in the chat, in the webinar chat space. Bronwyn, you have 30 seconds to ask your question. Or perhaps
I don't have a, Prof, just say that again.
Propose a solution.
Okay, I don't have a question. However, I hear Director speaking about the way in which police are trained and things like that, and also speaking about adopt a cop. And we hear all these things, and for me, and I think for many others, it's pure rhetoric right now, because we don't see these kinds of training, the sensitivities, and the ways in which police handle citizens in a sensitive way. We don't see it being translated if this training does in fact occur. And I'm not questioning the Director, it might be occurring, but people are different. And I'm not generalizing. I'm hoping that in some way or the other, that these kinds of questions and these kinds of concerns, anxieties of the public are actually taken up and addressed via the Director to the powers that be, and also in terms of the training of the police. And what I would like to say, because of my passion for the issue around gender-based violence, is one, in terms of reporting systems, I think it would be very, very important for women to know that their issues and the issues of rape and IPV, domestic violence, is taken seriously, firstly, and when they're reporting, they are taken into a private space in which they can speak about what has happened to them, and not the insensitivity that often occurs in what we call policing charge officers or whatever they're called, but rather allow these women the space and the humanity aspect should kick in. The citizenry, the citizens' rights should kick in. Their rights of dignity should be protected to be able to report these things in a sensitive manner, and perhaps allow female police women to take down statements and to speak to these women, and they should be trained in a way that allows them the relative sensitivity that is required. So that is one way, I think, in which gender-based violence victims should be treated. And secondly, in terms of protection orders and interdicts, I'd like to know that something would be done about this, that these interdicts and protection orders are followed up on, and that they are not merely pieces of paper. And like I said earlier, policy and practice and implementation, there's a huge disjuncture between the two, and that needs to be reconciled. And then we can work together as community and policing, as the Director spoke about, adopt a cop. We haven't seen this, we don't know about this, so these are the kinds of things that we need information on. And I think everybody in the communities are yearning for police to work with them to serve and protect and for their brutality to end. Thank you.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Just to piggyback on that, I see a comment and a question from Vokomaso, and this is for our director. The participant says, part of the reason why our country is going to shambles is the fact that we have grown to have a culture of not having collaborative approaches in terms of issues that we face as a country. And the question is, what role are institutions of higher learning playing in providing research to government departments in order to make sure that policies and prescription are in line with issues faced by citizens? So these are just comments and suggestions to the director. With that, I want to say thank you very much to the participants. And of course, most importantly, thank you very much to the presenters for taking the time to prepare, for your passion. Director, I know you had challenges logging on, but thank you so much for being here with us. And I think importantly for listening to the comments that have come from the public, because we do represent the public in the webinar. And perhaps at some time we can organize another webinar where we have more of SAP's personnel, so we can have a balance in terms of citizens and SAP and SAPs. So I cannot thank you enough. Attendees, to those who remain until the end, thank you a million times over. And to the organizers, Melissa and Shakila, thank you for your unwavering support and your professional organization. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, and thank you,
you.
Professor. It's really appreciated.
Thank you.